And we're semi-live.
What does semi-live mean?
Well, because it's live to us. It's not going to be live to everybody else.
Right. Hey, guys. So here's what we're doing. Coach Rob and I are getting together. What we wanted to do is we noticed in some of the recent live feeds that we've had some people asking some really good questions that we probably should be talking about way more, but we just don't, because in class we focus a lot on technique. And we want to answer these questions. So a couple of them came up. We came up with a few questions. We're just going to do a short format here where we're going to go through, we're going to answer some questions. If you guys have questions like this in the future that are non-technical, that we're going to try to spend more time on those technical questions for the live feeds. But we're going to do something like this where we can have different coaches going through and talking about more of these philosophical questions. So anything from you, Coach Rob?
No, I just think for me, especially a lot of the conversations, that's been one of the things that's been most helpful for me in my development is just pestering folks like you with questions. And you've always been very gracious with putting up with them. And I think that a lot of people, you can get a lot more progression, and you can get a lot more out of the game by really trying to invest in that, like trying to understand more of the culture, more of the mental side of jiu-jitsu, because it's one of those things that it's a rabbit hole once you start going down it, and there's always more questions that come up. And I think it's a good opportunity for us to to help out with folks that might be newer and help give them some specific clarity on some things that maybe they're like, I don't want to ask this. I don't, some people don't necessarily they don't know some of the etiquette kind of things, and they may have a preconceived notion of what that's like. So hopefully this will help.
For sure, yeah. And I think sometimes people are scared, especially when they're new, to ask questions in groups like that. So let's get it rolling. So speaking of rolling, first one here is common question is rolling etiquette. And what we're going to start with is, can I or should I ask a higher belt to roll? So I'll start here. I think that at our school, at least, and this is my opinion, is everybody's cool, right? So as long as you're cool, people will be cool with you, and you can ask anybody to roll. Now, what you need to understand is that sometimes people come in with an agenda, right? And it's nothing personal. So I've had people ask me to roll, and, I had a certain number of rolls that I needed to do, or I have somewhere else to be. So I will just decline. I'll say, no, I'm not going to roll with you, or, hey, I got to go, or something like that. And it's nothing against the person. It's nothing against the fact that they're a white belt. It's just the fact that, I came in with a certain thing, or maybe I needed to go, and I'll leave. But if I don't have anything pressing, I will absolutely roll with somebody like that. Now, something you got to keep in mind is we are one school amongst many schools, and a lot of schools have their own idea of that kind of rule of whether or not you should have, or you should ask a higher belt to roll. So I'll give you two examples. One is treatment and one is a roll. So I was down at another school with Professor George, and we were doing a private session with one of their black belts, and I was busting George's balls a little bit, like we do back at the gym. And it wasn't amongst any other students or anybody else, but it was just me and him. We were kind of going through some stuff, and the black belt at this other school got after me hard about that. He said, "That's not the way that we talk to black belts around here." And I was like, "Oh man, easy, and I tried to exxplain the situation, and he didn't have any time for that either. So that's just something where you need to understand. That's not how we do it here, bro. I was like, all right, man. So
I think that's also an example of you displaying your cider's charm in other places. I think you invite some of that stuff, because you're a big stocky guy. I think you get checked a lot,
man. It's speaking of that, I think it was on the same trip. We went down to Easton's, and they have what's called War at 4. This is the big training. So you show up at 4:00 on a Friday, and like everybody's there, right? And everybody knows the deal. Like, you're coming in, and when you leave, you're wearing somebody's blood. It's either yours or somebody else's, maybe a combination of the two, right? And so I think I was a purple belt at the time. So you'd all line up, and then how they do it is the black belts choose first who they want to roll with, and then it goes down from rank. So there's a guy, I think he was also a purple belt. He was about my size, a little bit older than me. And he kept walking by me. And we do this about 8 to 10 different times, right? And on the last time, he walked by me, and then he comes right back to me. And he goes, "You know what? I told myself I wasn't going to be a pussy today, and I was going to roll with you regardless of whether or not I was scared of you. I was like, what? What are you talking about? He's like, man, you freaked me out, but I'm going to roll with you. I was like, all right. I don't even know what I did. I barely talked to anybody here. I just showed up, just rolling. Like, I'm not rolling hard. I'm not trying to be that guy. So, needless to say, the first thing he did is we slapped hands, and he did a flying scissor sweep into like a heel hook on me. And I'm like, okay, well, now I'm going to have to be mean to you because this is ridiculous.
I think that's a thing where, because your neck is about as wide as your ears are,
Right.
It's like one of those things where like you've got this going on where it's like, oh, okay, that guy seems like he's pretty tough. Whereas me, like 150 pound like skinny nerd, people are just like, oh, I can go wrong with that guy. That guy's fine.
I don't know. I mean,
he ain't gonna hurt me.
I think people see the tats and they're like, what's this guy into? I don't know.
Yeah,
It's,
they probably are like, I'm not gonna not beat this guy up. Like I don't want to get submitted by the skinny little dude who looks like he should be working at a coffee shop.
Right.
Like that for sure happens. I think that's what a lot of people, when I train with them, they don't want to tap to stuff because they don't want to tap to a smaller guy.
Right.
And so sometimes I gotta put a little extra hot sauce on something in order to get like, sorry man, like sorry, that's the way it goes.
Yeah. What's that meme of the dude from the Hobbit riding on the scooter?
Oh yeah, Elijah
Wood. It's like
yeah. He's got his denim jacket on and he's on a little scooter.
Yeah. The picture of the dude murdering you at the gym. Yeah, that guy. And so, just to round up my answer here is, you got to be careful where you go, So if you go traveling to other schools, just ask the professor there when you check in, hey, what's the etiquette? Because again, I'm down at another school. We're rolling after a seminar, and I don't know any different. I go and I ask a black belt to roll, and it was like the clearing out of a bar in a Wild West movie. There was some other black belts hanging around him. And they all just kind of looked at me and cleared out of the wave and let the beating begin. And a beating begun. And I got the shit beat out of me for about 8 minutes. So after that, I was like, I probably shouldn't have asked an upper belt to roll. That was probably my bad. But I learned my lesson there.
Like, did you feel like that was like like, oh, you want to roll? Like, oh, sure, I'll give you a roll. Was it
that's exactly how I felt,
Okay.
In hindsight, yeah. Because it was like, a lot of times when you roll with somebody, you don't want to be that guy right away. So you kind of feel it out and you kind of let the other person, one of my favorite expressions is hit me as hard as you want to be hit as an upper belt, right? So if you want to roll light, I'll roll light. But if you want to go hard, I know how to do that too, right? And so that's the experience I got is like right off the bat, this guy was like, I don't care about you. I'm trying to murder you. And it was like, he wanted to teach me a lesson.
Okay.
Lesson learned. We learned a lesson that day.
Captain.
Aye. Good to know. Thank you. Thank you for that. So, Rob, you travel a lot, and I think you talked about it a little bit, but tell us about some of your experiences traveling and what you.
Yeah. So, for folks that don't know, like I traveled for a long time for my job. So, got to fly out to the coasts a lot of bigger cities. And one of the things that I like to do when I travel for work is I always try to find a gym of any. One of the cool things about jiu-jitsu is like it's a really big community and there's a lot of gyms all over the place. And the culture has really changed, especially over the last few years, where you have a lot of destination gyms that are really used to having visitors, and they encourage people to come in because they get paid drop-in fees, and plus they also have new fresh guys to roll with and stuff. And it's really cool because you can go in, like I've trained at a bunch of 10th Planet schools. I've never trained at a 10th Planet school, but it's cool to be able to go and try to learn some of their techniques and how to handle things, because they're a very loose Eddie Bravo kind of culture, and there's very minimal kind of etiquettes there. They're pretty loose. I call it like loosey goosey, like it's kind of your baseline etiquette stuff with upper belts, things like that. Like I've rolled with a ton of different upper belts there, and there's really not a lot of formality there. There's also other gyms that I've rolled at where they treat it like a Sadie Hawkins dance. Like you don't ask the girls to dance, the girls will ask you if they want to dance. Right. It's very much like that where, if I see I do a lot of competition classes. So competition classes, you've got mostly colored belts. I think usually that's what they do is like blue belts and up. And, sometimes there's certain gyms, well, they'll match you up specifically for, okay, we're going to get you three are kind of all the same size and you're all this like all blue belts or purple belts. So you'll be in a group and then they'll kind of match everybody up. And then there's other times where it's more like an open mat where you just kind of pick your partner. And for me, my general rule of thumb is I won't ask any upper belt to roll. If there's somebody that no gi is kind of hard because they might not have a ranked rash guard or something like that. You can just kind of pick whoever and people will let you know. But if I'm at a Gracie gym or something like that elsewhere, I'll try to roll with people that are the same level as me. And then if there's another upper belt that's there, if they don't have a partner or something like that, I'll just ask them politely, like, hey, would you like to roll? And more often than not, they'll say yes. If what I've experienced more is, especially if it's a smaller school, the owner, so if it's a brown belt or a black belt, that's kind of the head instructor. If you're a visitor from another school, they almost insist on rolling, as like, oh, you're here, oh yeah, let's roll. And that's a really cool experience because I've had the opportunity to roll with some very experienced, very high level world class competitors, and it for me it's a thrill because it's like, yeah, I'm gonna get absolutely destroyed by Marcelo Nunes, who's like 225 pounds, 6'6". Right. Like we're barely the same species, and get to feel world class pressure is like, that's and for me that's a thrill, but I'm not going to expect that everywhere that I go. Right. And I've heard that there are more formal gyms where that's they have a very specific, no, you don't, like if an upper belt wants to roll with you, then they'll let you know. Otherwise, just roll with people that are at your level. And right. You can kind of feel it out. The thing that I've experienced more etiquette-wise traveling is how they approach certain submission holds or rule sets. So right. Like 10th Planet schools, heavy on sub only. Heel hooks are very friendly, especially even, you can see people doing saddle entries and leg lock entries at white belt, where at other schools, the only time I've ever had an incident at a school was just doing like a single X sweep. So just like getting into a leg entanglement to do a sweep. And it was like, timeout. What do you think you're doing, sir? And I was a white belt at the time, so I was like, "Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't know. I didn't know I couldn't do that." It was like the right. Old Dave Chappelle scale. Oh, I'm sorry, officer. I didn't know I couldn't do that. And they let me know. And I was like, "Okay, all right, good to know." And usually, like if I show up someplace, I'll just ask them like, "Hey, do you guys do IBJJF? Is that how you like right. kind of that kind of school?" And more often than not, a quick conversation or uniform requirements or something like that. Each gym is kind of its own thing, but right. a quick phone or a conversation, and you can kind of get that stuff out in the open, and then you don't have to worry about some awkward situation, or unless you want to just make a story out of it and be like, all right, let's see what happens. You can do that too.
That was the time I got kicked out of that gym.
Yeah, I feel like we know a couple of guys that's probably the experience that they would have. Like,
absolutely. I want a story I can tell when I get back home. So just thinking about this, talking is something that comes up a lot in our gym, and maybe it's not an all too often asked question, but what are your thoughts on training partners? So at the end of class, a lot of times, especially in my class, we line up, we do up, down, out, right? So as a person, as a smaller person, there's a lot of big guys at our gym. Are you feeling obligated to train with everybody? Are you picking who you're training with? I mean, how do you approach that?
Sure. So it depends on the day for me and whether or not I have a competition coming up. So more often than not, if it's just like a normal class, I'm going to try and roll with everybody. Especially being on the coaching staff, it's I want to understand where everybody's at if they're white belts or newer folks, just kind of be able to connect with them for a second. Hey, what's going on? Hey, how you doing? And get to train with them a little bit and just to kind of feel where they're at. But at the same time, it's also for me too, because that's one of the times that I focus on my training. So especially if I see a blue belt or another upper belt or and it's like, oh, okay, cool. I'm gonna get my version of more intense training in. When I think about how if I'm maybe being more intentional about who I'm picking, like let's say for instance, I've got a competition coming up and I'm maybe doing lighter work, or maybe I recently had like an injury or I twisted my knee or something like that, but I still want to train, then I'll I'll try to specifically go and roll with people that are on the smaller side, or if we've got, some of our juveniles, the high schoolers are in there, or some of the girls that also come to our gym. I really enjoy training with a lot of our female population, because it forces me to be really technical and not rely on strength for passing or whatever it is, and hopefully try to give a good experience for those folks too, because they may have a hard time with really large partners that maybe they're not as technical, and there's things that can happen, or they can get smashed or something like that, and try to make sure that they have a good experience training with me too. But a lot of times it's just trying to communicate with that to the other person, because you don't want to offend somebody if they're like, sometimes people call me out, they're like, "Hey, Coach Rob, come here," and more often than not, I'm going to say, "Yeah, absolutely," unless there's a reason, like, I've twisted my knee or something like that, and Big BJ, who's an enormous human being, if he wants to roll me out, like, all right, I'm not going to say no. Like, come on, big fella, let's go.
Right.
That's me, it's, and being a smaller person, even when I travel, I'm of the mindset, and I don't force this mindset on anybody else, but it's definitely something that I think about, because I want my jiu-jitsu to be very technical and very sound, and I want to make sure that it works. And one of the ways you got to know that something that works is you got to put it to the test. And
Right.
it's
Absolutely.
much larger people. Yeah, I like some flashy stuff, but I also want to make sure my fundamentals are rock solid. And if you want to
Right.
test those fundamentals, go against somebody who's maybe 15 years younger than you and is an athlete and still in their prime
Right.
and isn't as skilled. We've got some D1 athletes that'll come in. We've got some people that are serious athletes, and it's an interesting test for someone like me who's maybe a little more experienced but much smaller. I'm not a gigantic guy, right? I'm kind of wispy.
Right.
And
Absolutely, you are. Yeah.
I have to be able to put that technique to the test. And if that technique doesn't work, I'm going to find out pretty quick. And I think
Right.
you have to put yourself in those situations if you really want to progress. And I encourage smaller people, if you want to get good at jiu-jitsu, then don't duck people. Like, you go after those tough rolls, and be safe and communicate when things are maybe not going your way. But I tell people, don't duck rolls. Like, you should be able to train with everybody.
Right. Yeah, that's really good points. I think looking at it from a coaching perspective is, I would tell students, you don't have to train with everybody. It's maybe you're next in the lineup for up down out, and you see somebody and you're like, hey, that's a big scary person, I don't want to train with them. That's fine. Absolutely. We don't need to make a big deal about it, but pick the people you want to train with. At the same time, I think you should be able to train with anybody. You need those light rolls, those flow rolls, those submission rolls. We talked about that in last live feed with different students, because it really tests your technique, right? If all you're doing is going against stronger, bigger people, you're most likely using a lot of athleticism, a lot of physical attributes that are good for jiu-jitsu. They have a place, but it's not really you focusing on your technique, right? So going against a lighter person and really focusing on your technique is a beneficial role. Also a beneficial role, especially if you want to compete, is going against people who are super aggressive, right? I know a lot of times we have problems with people who are aggressive, because a lot of times it's friendly roles. But when you go to competition, and I think this is probably the biggest shock for most people who compete, who have never been competitive in a physical, like grappling type sport before, is the person who's on the other side of the mat of you doesn't care about you. They came for, points, a medal, whatever it may be, and they're willing to run through your face to get to that medal, right?
Yeah.
And so like that
Yeah.
indignation, I mean, that just, I don't care about you, I came here for a purpose. Like, people need to get used to that, and that's where that aggression, learning how to be aggressive, or at least handle that aggression, is super important. Yeah, and then like you said, I think that's a great point, is I don't need to train with everybody all the time. I do as a coach. I 100% agree with you. But as a student, I don't need to train with everybody all the time. But at the same time, I think you should ask yourself, why does BJ scare me? Why does Drew scare me? It's like, because they're these big, scary guys. Well, let's go get acclimated to that a little bit, because most likely in a self-defense situation, a fighting situation, is going to be a bigger, stronger person. And I want to know that my jiu-jitsu works against them, right?
Yeah. Well,
Absolutely.
and the thing I tell people too is, like, especially if you're a smaller person, the risk of, oh, I'm gonna get smashed by that person is well worth the reward of having a technique work on someone who is much larger than you.
Right.
Because
Right.
there are times when I was like, especially when I first started playing a lot of open guard and trying to get into single X and some of these other kind of sweeps. The first time I swept somebody that was much larger than me into like a leg lock, where I was like, oh, this person doesn't know what they don't know what I'm doing.
Right.
I have a strategic advantage, and I just made it work on somebody. Like it was just like this little simple thing that happened, but it flicked this little light in my head of like, oh, I see. If I know stuff that they don't know, then I can have an advantage where they have a physical advantage over me, but I can have a tactical advantage over this person.
Right.
And that really unlocked some stuff for me that helped give me a lot of confidence to not fear those roles of,
Right.
it's like that kind of that meme of like, it's I make fun of it because it's not entirely true, but it is. I like to tell myself that it is. It's got the little skinny purple belt and the that just gorilla goon with a white belt on, and it says, "Oh, wouldn't it be great if you could just look at someone big and say, oh, how interesting,' instead of you're scared of them or whatever."
Right.
And it's like, yeah, you got this little skinny technical purple belt. I'm like, yeah, and if they roll, that purple belt might get that guy, but there's probably going to be 6 minutes where that person's getting smushed, and it's gonna
Right.
suck.
Right.
Like,
Absolutely.
yeah,
Yeah.
that maybe he'll catch him in a triangle or a sweep or something cool, but there's a high likelihood that little purple belt's getting smashed. I know because I am that little purple belt.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. All right. All right, let's go on to the next one. So during the last live feed, you asked this question, and I thought it was a really good question. So I'm gonna actually pose it to you, and I'm gonna break it up into a couple different pieces here. So the first piece is, how has your game changed as you progress? So maybe you want to talk a little bit about your history as training, but obviously you started out as a white belt with us at Fargo BJJ, and you're now a purple belt. And so, two sub questions to that is, was there any techniques that you kind of shied away from in the beginning? And probably most techniques, right? But maybe a particular technique where you're like, nah, I'm never going to do that. Maybe leg locks or something like that that you do all the time now. And second one to that, and probably a better question, is there techniques that you used in the beginning as a white belt, maybe even in the blue belt, that you abandoned that you have come back to now?
Yeah. So I started training. My first class was October 15th of 2014. Actually, my first class was a class with you and Professor George. It was a Monday night, like 6 p.m. fundamentals
Hell
class
yeah.
back
Hell
in the
yeah.
day. And
Yeah.
I still remember a lot about that class too, because I remember we did some judo stuff and then like frame escapes from side control. And it
Very
was
cool.
like just really simple class, but it's very
Yeah.
burned in my brain of like what my
Right.
first class experience was like. Um, when I first started training, I was physically quite a bit different. So for folks who don't know, I've got really bad juvenile rheumatoid arthritis. So it's in my hands, my joints, everywhere. I've had it since I was 16, and makes it really hard for me to have good grips. Obviously I'm a very slight person anyway. So I broke my wrists when I was in high school. So I've always had kind of issues with grips and strength and stuff like that. And I was really interested in jujitsu, and I didn't want that to stop me. So I just started training and was like, all right, I'm going to take my fingers and see how we can make this work. So a lot of the things that I thought weren't going to work for me were grips in the collar and the sleeve. So like I'd see, like I just started like understanding what like collar, like a double sleeve guard, like spider guard and stuff like that. And these guys had these really gnarly knuckles, and I was like, that's probably not for me. My
Right.
knuckles are already gnarly. Like I don't need any more gnarliness in my knuckles. And I was like, I don't know if that's gonna work. And so I focused more on things like just my frames and trying to understand like, okay, I can maybe do like butterfly sweeps and things like that I don't have to hold on to the gi because I don't have good grip strength.
Right.
And it took a long time for that grip strength to really start to come. It took like probably a good 2 years before I could start to like feel really comfortable with like a collar and sleeve grip or like a
Yeah.
cross collar choke or something like that. Just because I didn't have that confidence in my grips, but it just took a long time. And so now it's interesting because now that's like my primary game is collar chokes and collar and sleeve, and like I do a lot of like sneaky stuff. So and a lot of that
Yeah.
sneaky stuff uses collars and these little grips, and It's just taken, several years worth of work to be able to feel comfortable with those grips so that I can hold them and have them be useful and not just like, I'm going to grab this. Oh, they're going to pull it. Oh, I'm going to grab this. They're going to pull it. And that's kind of how it happened in the beginning.
Right.
Things that I used like back then, like technique wise, I never thought I'd really use Kimuras because I always thought Kimuras were kind of like a strong guy technique. Like
For
they're
sure,
good control, like a really awesome grip, but I never really thought I'd use them much in rolls. And more often than not, when I end up using a Kimura now, it's more as a way to get to the back. Like I'll do some like rolling Kimuras and stuff like that to maybe pass the guard. But otherwise, I don't really use it a ton. Personally, it's something I would like to do more, but I just don't. When I first started, do you remember the first time you submitted somebody in training? Like, is that a memory that you have?
I don't know necessarily like the first time I submitted somebody. It's always weird to me though, where like I remember my first day, right? I remember my first class every time
Yep.
my year anniversary. Oh yeah, every time my year anniversary comes up, I know that like that's my
Yeah.
day. And like you said, you were talking about your first class. I remember my first class. I remember who my partner was. I don't remember like all the details of the class, but I remember we were doing back attacks, right? And I had a conversation with a student probably a few months ago, and I asked them when they started training and when their first class was, and they had no idea. And I was like, that doesn't register to me that that's a thing. But I don't.
It's like not knowing your your mom's birthday or something. It's like,
Right.
what? How do you not know that?
Yeah. So I don't necessarily remember the first person, but I remember like significant people. Like I remember the first time, calling them out. I remember the first time I submitted Professor George, because that was like a big deal to me, right? Where he was the guy. He's still the guy, but he was the guy at the time. He was the instructor, and probably in my brain, he gave me that. It was like, hey, I'll throw this guy a bone. So
Yeah.
we're all beating up on him all the time. But yeah, I remember that, but not my first one. Do you remember your first one?
I do.
Who was it?
I do. I was Charlie Dawson,
Oh.
which is such an awesome person to have.
Absolutely.
My first real submission. And Charlie and I have been friends for a long time.
Oh, we're gonna hear about this.
Oh, I've had conversations with him. He knows this. Charlie Dawson's one of my favorite people at our academy. He's just a complete maniac, and he was one of the first guys where like he started maybe a little bit after me, I think. But he's just super strong, tough guy, and I ended up catching him with an Ezekiel choke from top half. So I was in top half guard, he was in half guard, and I had the underhook over his head, and I just grabbed my wrist, and I had kind of seen one, but like didn't really know what it was, and I just went, ah! And just like gave it hell.
Show's over.
Yeah, and I was just like, oh my god, I just submitted somebody. Like this was like probably 7 or 8 months into training. So I was like, I was getting smoked 3 days a week by everybody. And to get a submission, I was like, oh my God, this is the best day of my life. And then, and Charlie would just completely smash me. Like he probably submitted me 8 times in that roll and I got him once,
Right.
But I was like, oh my God. Like,
Man, you'll always remember that. Yeah.
Always. Yeah. And, but that Ezekiel choke was like my thing, where I was like, okay, well, if I can submit people with that one, then that's probably going to work on like newer people that are coming in. So at least I've got something sneaky. Right. And I kind of got away from it for a while because I was trying to learn other things, but I find myself using it a lot more now.
Right.
And using it to like set up other things. So I'll threaten it a lot. But yeah, that was like one of the first submissions I learned. And I think one of the first submissions a lot of people learn is like, okay, this is, people don't know what this is, and they're not going to know what's happening until it's late. You're like, oh, that's cool. Ezekiel choke was definitely that one for me. And I remember I see first tournament that I ever went to, the first black belt I ever got to see roll was Bruce Hoyer, who's from down in Sioux Falls. And I saw him at the Fargo Open use an Ezekiel choke to submit some really, really big, like really just large human beings. I was like, oh my God, like that works on everybody apparently.
Right. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. So I think, I heard this analogy one time, and I think it's ever present in jiu-jitsu, but it was from a CrossFit guy, right? And so he was saying in the beginning, when you show up to your CrossFit school, you just do what they tell you because you don't know any different. And then after a while, you start chasing like the greatest workout. What are the best guys, gals in the world doing? I want to do their workouts. I want to do whatever. And then after a while, you kind of get to this point where this evolution occurs where you go back and you're just doing the workout that your school gives you or your gym gives you, right? And it was there the whole time. You just were chasing something that doesn't exist. And I think that's, I was thinking about that a lot. And I think that's ever present in jiu-jitsu, right? Is where, when I started, I didn't know jiu-jitsu. So I just did whatever professor showed or whoever the coach was at the time, they showed me, and I had a lot of guys helping me out. Doug, I'm sure Doug, Professor Dave, a lot of us, we would just, especially on Sundays, coming in and, we'd help, we ask questions and just, small group stuff. And that was probably the biggest thing that really helped me out. But then I started chasing stuff. I started chasing like this holy grail. What are the best guys in the world doing? What's Hodger Gracie doing? And what I found after 11 plus years of doing jiu-jitsu is it's really all the same. Like, yeah, there's a couple guys out there who are doing wild and crazy stuff, but chances of you being able to do that are probably pretty small. Everything you need to be successful, we're teaching you, right? Or it's just asking the question of I know you've had some young guys hitting up you, Rob, after class, asking like, hey, tell me about this collar sleeve stuff, and you have the answers, maybe not necessarily stuff you show in class because it's not relevant to that particular block of training we're doing, but it's stuff you're more than willing to show people that's going to open up those doors for them and make them super successful.
Yeah. Well, and I love the, when I started doing the coaching program, one of the things that I think was kind of eye-opening to me was just how effective the fundamental movements are. And part
Absolutely.
of the reason, I always liked coming to fundamentals classes, and I know there's some people that they just want to come in and train, or they just want to come in and learn like advanced level stuff because that's just what they're interested in. And the thing that I find myself still being obsessed with is the fundamentals and doing them like perfectly.
Right.
And because like as I've gotten to train more, the more that I see like that, if you come to my class, I do the same warm up that I did on my very first class. It's,
right.
I mean, really minor changes, but it's all the same movements as my very
right.
first class that I did. And I still do it. And me personally, I don't get bored of it because I'm trying to do those movements perfectly and I'm trying to help other people do them perfectly. Because if you do them, if you get that many reps of them, then you start to see that those little movements are the building blocks of all the other stuff that seems like it's like a completely different technique. It's like, oh no, that's still a hip out. That that that's still a bridge. That's still throwing your triangle up, whatever it is. Like those are the little building blocks of everything else. And the more time I think that people spend, and I think everybody throughout their journey is gonna go off and they're gonna start looking at weird lapel stuff and leg lock stuff, and then you'll end up coming back to the fundamentals at some point because you'll need them. Whether
absolutely.
and even Professor George talked about that too. Like it's been really interesting rolling with him, after the last few years of him not being able to train the way that he's used to, and then seeing how crisp his fundamentals still are when he rolls and like how he retains his guard and how he's still got his tricks and how he has to be super efficient with his movements, but that's where he's at his development and his ability to roll. And he's still, jiu-jitsu has got this really interesting way of being there for that person and whatever they need.
Right.
And the game adjusts, and it's not static. It's always dynamic. Every roll's dynamic, every stage in your development is dynamic. It's like trying to put your finger in a river and be like, okay, this is where this river is. I'm like, no, the river's always moving. Your finger's there, but you can move your finger and it's gonna be a completely different river too.
That got deep.
Dude, philosophy degree, son. Look at all these books. Look, I got a bunch of philosophy degree out books.
Probably my favorite thing recently, and I'm sure we've had this conversation in various forms, but I just recall it recently. We had one of your white belt, but our white belt students came up to us and was talking to us after class one day and said, when I first started, you have us do these forward rolls down the mat. And I thought this was the dumbest thing ever. He said, until we were doing some training and somebody hip tossed me and I didn't land properly. And I was like, oh, it makes sense now. Like they were teaching me how to fall properly. I didn't understand that at the time. And I think that's a big thing is people come in and they're like, why are we doing all these weird things on the ground? It's like, it's hard to teach you jujitsu right away because there's so many moving pieces. But, we're just trying to teach you basic movements. And that's what we do. That's why we do it every day, because these are all movements that you're going to use and you need to get super familiar with, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think everybody is like, but you see some people like really buy into the fundamental stuff really quickly, and the people that do, it seems like they progress. It's like this really sharp hockey stick of like, oh, okay, cool, yeah, I get it. This is all the building block stuff. Okay, cool, and
Right.
they'll just take off. And then there's other people that maybe have attributes that'll get them to go for a little while, and then they'll like kind of plateau, and then when those folks want to develop, they start spending more time back on the fundamentals or more simple things, and then they can start to progress again. It's really interesting to see that, especially you're there every day and you kind of see people's how different people focus on it, because not everybody's the same. Not everybody's you know wants to learn everything about jiu-jitsu. They just want to like, hey, I just want to do this. I want to do enough. I want to do
Right.
this.
Right.
It's all different.
So that's a good segue into our last question here. So Professor George has said this to me a few times, and I'm starting to believe it more and more. But he said that the most successful people that come into our program, after let's call it 2 years, are your smaller people, and usually women, right? Because they're automatically smaller coming in. They're not necessarily weak, but they're weaker than a lot of the bigger guys that are training there, right? So they're already at this disadvantage. So they have to embrace the technique. They have to embrace jiu-jitsu, and they skyrocket after a couple of years where you come back and they're phenomenal because they embrace the technique. And certainly there are guys like that, but a lot of times you see with the bigger, stronger guys who have a harder time with the ego is they come in, and I'll admit this, I did this, right? Where I came in, I was a bigger, stronger guy, and I used all my physical attributes to start beating on people. And it got me a purple belt. But then when I quickly realized that purple belt is that, things start to equal out at purple belt. There was another guy that I was training with. He started about 6 months after me. And I think he got promoted to blue belt or purple belt a little bit after me. But we were on the same training track, and he was significantly smaller than me. And the guy was beating me up with guard, right? And I was afraid to play guard because I never did that, right? And so, just looking at that, where he embraced jiu-jitsu, he embraced the guard. And yeah, it was this marathon, but after 2 to 3 years, he was winning and I wasn't. And I had to basically step back and almost demote myself a little bit and spend time working on the fundamentals of guard retention, start playing open guard just so I could catch up again. And that's actually extended my time at belts. I had a purple belt for dang near 4 years, and I think it was because of that is where, yeah, up until that point, I was using what I came in the door with. And that I think this is the same for everybody, where at some point you have to change to keep progressing, right? And sometimes you have to change more than once. And the people who just say, all right, yeah, I got to change, and they're more than willing to accept it right away, it's not that hard of a change, and they'll skyrocket. Where somebody like me, where after 3 to 4 years of training, I was a coach, right? Probably one of the more prominent coaches as far as teaching time, not necessarily technique or anything like that, but as far as how many classes a week I was teaching, I was like, man, how embarrassing, where I have to take a step back here and I have to go roll with the white belts and play guard and have them beat on me just so I can get up to the level where I'm supposed to be, And so the question is, and I'm going to throw this question out to you, and I kind of answered it for myself already, is, let's say Rob walks in, right? October, whatever. What was your first class? October 15th?
Yep.
October 15th. So Rob walks in again, and now you're the coach. You are the fundamentals coach, and you are going to give yourself some advice as a white belt. What would you say?
I think the biggest thing that I would tell myself is focus on your guard. I completely agree, because I was already interested. I wanted to be a guard player when I came in, but really focusing on the guard retention part of guard, that's when I noticed I started to accelerate much faster and started to have more success. Was and trying to understand more about how I could prevent bad things from happening rather than reacting to the bad things that already have happened.
Right.
Because
Yeah. Right.
that's one of the things he used to tell me about. Is like, listen, man, you didn't lose this on step 7. You lost this on step 1.
Right.
Step 1 happened when you didn't, like, I had this grip and you didn't do anything about it.
Right.
And it was like when you would constantly let me know, like, because I'd be frustrated about, like, this thing's not working. It's like, you keep losing step 1. If this is a chess match, I'm getting my pawn over the 50-yard line every time, and you're not stopping me from doing that. So
Right.
you have to stop that, and then we can start about, okay, and then
Right.
then we can get to step 2. But
Yeah.
it's like you're not preventing the right problem. And I think that was the thing that it took me a long time to understand, was like the speed of how stuff happens, and like understanding what problems I needed to prioritize addressing, because I would be so focused on, like, trying to spaz out or freak out and do what white belts do, and not necessarily going, oh, okay, you need to not do, like, hip out faster and do this, like
Right.
that's the kind of stuff that I think would have probably saved me a lot of beatings. I
Right.
think, because
Right. Yeah.
I spent a lot of time, like, getting smashed in, like, side control, and I still spend time getting smashed in side control, don't get me wrong. Like, being able to, like, and I think I think that stuff's actually beneficial to some extent, of like, you have to get comfortable getting uncomfortable. And, like, I spend a lot of time with you beating me up. So it's like I'm used to having, like, Smashville, USA, and
Right.
just being like, okay, we're here now. I guess now I got to try and work my way out of this little predicament I've got myself into, you
Right.
know, and
Yeah.
like, and I think and just that encouragement too. And that's the thing that I try to tell people, is like, not to think that it's like a 6-month workshop. Like,
Right.
okay, cool, you're going to learn 6 months of jujitsu, and then all of a sudden you're going to be out there kicking people's asses. Like, no. Like, I think if you really want to get the benefit out of jujitsu, you have to embrace it, and you have to show up, and you have to be on the mat, and that's it.
Yeah.
Not
Yeah.
everything
Just
else.
show up. Yeah. Yeah.
Everything else is not going to be the same,
Right.
because there are some days that are terrible, and there's some days where, you're having those real lonely moments in your car after class, going, why do I do this? Like, I
Right.
just got absolutely worked. Like, why,
Right.
why,
Yeah.
like, like, there are some times when that happens, and there's other days you walk out of there and you're on cloud 9. And for me, I'm mostly a cloud 9 kind of guy when I walk out of jujitsu.
Right.
But, like, and just trying to spend as much time on the mat as possible, that, as much as you can get away with your lifestyle. I'm jealous of some of these guys. We've got college kids that are coming in, and they can come in 2 days a week, 6 days, or two times a day, 6 days a week,
Yeah.
and
Right.
I see them progress so quick. I'm like, good for you, because if I
Yeah.
was you, I'd be doing the exact same thing.
Absolutely. Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
like, you got father time on your side, you got don't have much for bills, and you're spending a lot of time at a jiu-jitsu gym. Yeah, if I was in your spot, I'd be doing the same thing. So good on you.
Man, I heard a story. I was listening to, I don't know if it was a podcast or what it was, but guy was talking about how he was talking with one of his coaches, and he was talking about, he had like the blue belt blues, where maybe he's a white belt, maybe he's right around that blue belt, but he would just go home every day and he'd shower after working out, and he would just be crying in the shower. He just got beat up or he got choked out, and just this like beating of his lifetime every time, every time he went into jiu-jitsu. And, the coach said, yeah, man, I used to do that too. And the guy's like, wait, what? No, that couldn't have happened like that. I have to be exclusive in that. And he goes, no, I don't think so. We just don't talk about it, because when we show up, we want to be here. We want to have fun. But something important that I think we all understand is, I think for everybody, and probably everybody in some facet or another, like that first 6 months, it feels like you're drowning. And a lot of times you're like, man, why am I doing this? And
Yeah.
that's why I encourage people, you just got to commit to it for a year, right? You're going to be somewhere in a year. Why not be here? And after a year, you're going to be so close to a blue belt, you won't want to quit. Right. And like you said, right around that 6 months is when you got your first submission. I would bet that if we did a poll amongst students and just probably jiu-jitsu people in general, they would say that they started to hit that breakthrough right around that 6 to 8 months is where things started to make sense. They got their first submission. Now they're on cloud 9. And then everything from there just gets better and better. And once you get that purple belt, that purple belt takes like 3 to 5 years, depending upon, if you're coming 2 times, 6 days a week, you're probably going to get in 3 years. If you're, you got a career, you got a family, you're coming 2 to 3 times a week, it might take that 5 years. But at that point, like, you're going to be unstoppable. You know, you're going to be able to beat just about anybody who comes in the door, and probably vast majority of the people who are coming to class, and you're going to have a lot of good experiences. But to tell you as a brown belt who's been training for 11 years that I don't have bad days, man, it happens to me all the time. Like, sometimes I go into the gym and I feel like I don't know jiu-jitsu. You know, like, even rolling with white belts, I'm like, man, what am I doing? I have no idea. Like, the pieces aren't connecting very well, you know, and I still get subbed, and it bothers me, man. I told this story, and I'm going to tell it now to everybody. Is we were doing stand-up training a couple Sundays ago, and one of the new students, heck of a wrestler, he ankle picked the shit out of me, and it bothered me. It still
shout
bothers me.
out to my boy Mark out here,
Shout
ankle
out to
picking
Mark.
coach.
He ankle picked. I wasn't ready.
I watched it,
It
and it
wouldn't
was
have mattered.
amazing.
I don't think it would have mattered, but that bothered me. I mean, I went home that night. I was looking up ankle pick defenses. I was looking up all sorts of stuff, man. It bothered me. So to say it doesn't happen to me, guys, it does. I feel your pain, right? I still go home and cry in the shower every once in a while. What else, man? Is that it? I think that's it for today. You got anything you want to say?
Just a reminder, everybody, if you haven't, please make sure you go and hit subscribe on the YouTube channel. We're trying to get that thing above 1,000. If you've got friends or people that are interested in jiu-jitsu that would at least like to watch videos, I got friends of mine, they don't train, but they like watching jiu-jitsu because they like mixed martial arts and just seeing what the hell we're doing. Just have them click subscribe, because it's a milestone for us, because if we get above that 1,000 threshold, then we can also start to do live streaming on the YouTube platform instead of just the Facebook group, which would be awesome, because we want to try and expand out the online content that we're doing, like these kind of video podcast things, and putting stuff out there for our students to be able to consume, and hopefully keep learning, stay engaged with us while we're on the shutdown from the Rona.
Right.
And we're trying to put out stuff that one, we think you guys would get value out of, but also we need to hear from you too. So make sure that you're commenting, reaching out to us. We're super accessible. So just send a message over to anybody on the coaching staff, or, comment on any of the videos or anything like that. We're combing everything for, ideas of things that are going to matter for our students. And, we're happy to do breakdowns or, more of these kind of discussion type things, if that's what you're interested in. But just let us know one way or another what matters to you, and we will do our best to accommodate.
For sure. I like that. Yeah. Let us know if you liked this video. And if you guys want to see more of these, we can definitely answer questions. You guys give us the questions, we'll answer them. We can get more coaches on. You can direct them at specific coaches if you want, however you want to do that. We're more than willing to do that, to show our appreciation for your guys' support through this. I think that's all I got.
Okay, cool.
All right.
Awesome. Again, Coach Rob, he's Coach Matt. This is our video podcast numero uno.
Number one.
So, all right, awesome. All right. Thanks, guys.